The Iraqi cabinet's examining a controversial draft law that would allow U.S. forces to stay in Iraq for more than 3 years. U.S. military chief Michael Mullen warned Tuesday Iraq could risk, quote, losses of significant consequence if the deal's not approved quickly. The U.S. ambassador to Iraq, Ryan Crocker, also defended the deal Monday, saying it, quote, fully restores Iraq's sovereignty. But tens of thousands of Iraqis demonstrated against the proposed Status of Forces Agreement, or SOFA, on Saturday. Under the draft agreement, U.S. soldiers would retain immunity from prosecution for all actions committed in combat, and the U.S. would retain all jurisdictions over its nationals' actions, except for actions committed off-duty and away from U.S. bases. Critics have dismissed the provision because U.S. troops seldom leave their bases in Iraq unless on authorized missions. Iraqi and U.S. negotiators are hoping to finalize the agreement before a UN mandate expires this year. Patrick Cockburn is the Middle East correspondent for the London Independent. He's covered Iraq for many years. He's just back from Iraq. He's the author of several books. His latest is called Muqtada al-Sadr, The Shia Revival and the Struggle for Iraq. He just returned from Iraq. He joins me here in the Firehouse studio. We're also joined by Raed, Jarrar, an Iraqi blogger and analyst consultant to the American Friends Service Committee's Iraq program. He translated a leaked version of the proposed agreement available on his website, raedinthemiddle.blogspot.com, joining us from Washington. Let's start with you, Raed Jarrar. What did you translate? What are the main tenets of this agreement?
I actually translated 2 leaked drafts. The first one was last month. It was just a draft during their negotiations. But 2 days ago, someone from Baghdad sent me the final draft that was approved by al-Maliki's cabinet and sent to the Political Council for National Reconciliation. Now, the 2 drafts are very similar. The only difference is that the new one, the final one, is more politicized. They put a couple of sound bites there to, I think, to pressure the Iraqi parliament to pass it. For example, they ask for a U.S. withdrawal by 2011 in one article, but then there are many other parts of the article that actually cancels that call for a withdrawal. The same way that you describe the jurisdictions over soldiers article. In one piece of the article, they give some jurisdictions to the Iraqi side, but then the other parts cancel that part. So I don't think there are a lot of significant differences. We are still in a place where the U.S. is planning permanent bases in Iraq. The U.S. soldiers and contractors are still above the Iraqi laws, and I think the agreement is still widely rejected by the Iraqi public and the Iraqi parliament that has the final say in this case.
And who exactly wrote it?
The agreement was written by the 2 executive branches, and I think it's really shameful that after all of these months of negotiations, no one from the Iraqi parliament or the U.S. Congress knows anything about the content. Parliamentarians and Congress members end up relying on organizations like mine to find leaked agreements and translate it to them. So there is like a very exclusive negotiation happening behind closed doors. I think negotiations is a big word, actually. It's more the U.S. government putting an agreement and getting their allies in Iraq to bless it. I don't think there are real negotiations happening between 2 sovereign countries. We shouldn't forget that the U.S. allies in Iraq will say and do whatever the U.S. government asks them to do.
Patrick Cockburn, you're just back from Iraq. There were tens of thousands of people protesting the agreement this weekend. Michael Mullen, the U.S. military chief there, bluntly warned Iraq on Tuesday it risks security losses of significant consequence unless it approves the agreement. The deadline is UN mandate runs out December 31st.
Yes, I think that the protests against it, I mean, in this case, by the followers of Muqtada al-Sadr, and the general mood in Iraq, I mean, it illustrates, first of all, the occupation was never popular from day one, 5 years ago, and it's still very unpopular. So it's going to be very difficult to get this through, and you can feel the opposition to it mounting in lots of corners. And the people who negotiated it, when I was talking to them in Baghdad, seemed to live in a bit of a never-never-land about how this agreement was going to go down among the broad mass of Iraqis.
Your book is called Muqtada al-Sadr and the Battle for the Future of Iraq. How significant is his opposition to this?
Well, I mean, the Sadrist Muqtada's movement is the only sort of mass movement among the Shia, and it has shown that it has the ability to mobilize tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people against the accord. So there's signs over this week that the government has been influenced, the Iraqi government has been influenced by the demonstrations and the general unpopularity of the agreement.
Before, President Bush has rejected a congressional effort to bar the U.S. military from controlling Iraq's oil resources. I'm reading from a piece of yours, Raed, Jarrar, out of the Friends Service Committee. Before signing a bill authorizing military funding, the president issued a signing statement saying he would not be bound by a provision of the bill prohibiting expenditure of funds to exercise U.S. control of the oil resources of Iraq. First, Raed, Jarrar, what does this mean?
Well, it means a lot of bad things. It means that the U.S. president has just signed or issued a signing statement showing the intention of the U.S. government to take over control over Iraq's oil. I think this is an amazingly frustrating and shocking thing to do at the same week that the Bush administration is trying to sign a long-term agreement legitimizing long-term occupation of Iraq. So it gives, I think, the wrong or maybe the right message to the Iraqi people that the U.S. will continue occupying their country to secure oil, to control their country's oil. And maybe it shows how oil is one major reason behind this occupation.
Patrick Cockburn, what happens if this agreement goes down?
Well, the UN mandate will probably be extended. But I think it underlines the shakiness of the US position in Iraq at the moment, that they haven't been able to get this agreement through. When they first started negotiating in March, Washington, the White House, seemed to feel that they could simply go through, that it would simply, the occupation would go on really as long as they wanted. And everything that's happened over the last 6 months shows that this isn't the situation. Whatever McCain may say, this isn't really in Washington's hands anymore. Iraq is really going to decide how long the U.S. troops remain there.
You've just come from Iraq. You're here in the United States. You don't live here. I was wondering your sense in this very heated presidential campaign of the almost complete lack of reference to the war. The last presidential debate, people might have felt relief afterwards because the words war were hardly mentioned throughout the whole thing, relief that maybe there is no war going on.
Sure, I mean, I think it's extraordinary. I mean, there's an obvious reason. First of all, the mortgage crisis from March and afterwards the great financial crisis concerns people. But I think also that if you like, propaganda about the surge, giving the impression that Iraq